It was a bright afternoon when a tall man walked quietly into one of the most expensive luxury car dealerships in the city. His clothes were simple, nothing fancy, just a pair of worn jeans, a plain black t-shirt, and boots that looked like they had seen many miles. He did not look like the kind of customer the salesman inside expected to see. After all, this dealership usually welcomed millionaires, celebrities flashing gold watches, and businessmen wearing suits that cost more than the cars outside. The man pushed open the glass doors and stepped inside. The room smelled of leather and polish, every corner shining with lights that reflected off the smooth curves of luxury cars. Salesmen in sharp suits stood near the entrance, scanning every new arrival. They usually rushed forward when someone walked in, eager to shake hands and make a deal, but this time they didn't move. They just stared at the man in jeans, whispering quietly to each other. "Probably lost," one salesman muttered under his breath. Another chuckled and said, "He won't buy anything. Look at him." They didn't even try to hide their smirks. The tall man walked slowly between the cars, his eyes calm and thoughtful. He looked at each car carefully, admiring the design, the details, the way the sunlight hit the paint. To him, it was not about showing off wealth or power. He simply loved machines. He loved the feeling of a car built with care, the way it could carry someone across miles with freedom. But to the staff watching, he was nothing more than a waste of time. One of them finally walked up, his smile sharp but not kind. "Sir, these cars are very expensive," he said in a cold voice. "This place is for serious buyers only." His tone was not welcoming. It was dismissive. The man only gave a small smile, a polite nod. He did not argue. He didn't say a single word to defend himself. He simply stepped aside, letting the salesman pass, and continued looking quietly at the cars. He didn't mind their coldness. He didn't get angry or raise his voice. He just carried himself with the same quiet dignity that had followed him all his life. Some customers inside noticed this strange scene. A couple buying a sports car looked at him curiously, wondering why the staff were treating him like a beggar. Others just ignored him, thinking he was out of place. He looked like a simple man wandering where he shouldn't. What none of them realized was that this quiet stranger was Keanu Reeves, one of the most famous actors in the world, a man who had earned millions yet lived humbly, a man who had bought motorcycles not for showing off but because he loved the ride. He was someone who rode the subway, who gave up his seat to strangers, who shared food with the homeless without cameras around. But in this showroom, no one knew, and no one bothered to look deeper. The sales staff whispered again. "Should we ask him to leave?" one asked. Another laughed. "He won't even touch the door handle of these cars. Let's not waste time." Their laughter was quiet but sharp enough for him to hear. Still, he did not respond. He just kept walking, his eyes steady, his hands behind his back, as if he were only a visitor appreciating an art gallery. There was a strange calm about him, the kind of calm that made one wonder, who was this man really? Why did he not fight back against the insults? Why did he seem so untouched by arrogance and pride around him? To those who were watching, it was confusing. To him, it was simply another day, another place where appearances deceived people. As he walked toward the exit, one more salesman stepped forward, blocking his way for a moment. "Sir, we don't allow loitering here," he said with a fake smile. The words were sharp, almost like a push without hands. The tall man gave another polite nod, and without hesitation, he stepped aside and headed toward the door. Outside, the city was busy, cars rushing, people moving. Nobody out there knew what had just happened inside. Nobody knew that a dealership had just pushed out a man who could have bought every single car in the showroom without blinking. Nobody knew that the person they dismissed as unworthy was a beloved star who had inspired millions. But inside, a young mechanic who had been working in the corner froze. His eyes widened as the tall man stepped out into the sunlight. He knew that face. He had watched his movies as a child. He had read stories of his kindness. He realized with shock that the man everyone mocked was Keanu Reeves himself. And in that moment, the story was only beginning. A story that would soon leave everyone speechless. The moment Keanu Reeves stepped further inside the dealership, the air grew colder, not because of the weather, but because of the way people looked at him. The sales staff had already judged him. They saw only his simple clothes, his quiet walk, his lack of flashy jewelry or expensive watches. To them, this was not a man who belonged among luxury cars. To them, he was wasting their time. Two salesmen leaned against a desk, whispering to each other. Their voices were low, but not low enough. "What's he even doing here?" one asked, shaking his head. "Probably just wants to take pictures and dream," the other replied with a laugh. A few others smirked and crossed their arms. Ignoring him completely, Keanu walked slowly. His eyes still scanning the shining cars, he stopped near a sleek black sports car. The kind that looked like it belonged in a movie. He admired the shape, the details. He didn't touch it, but it was clear he appreciated its beauty. Yet before he could even take a longer look, a salesman hurried forward, his face stiff. "Sir," the salesman said sharply, "these cars are not for display only. They are for serious buyers." His words were like a wall. Meant to push Keanu back, Keanu simply looked at him and nodded. His calm expression never changed. But the salesman was not done. "If you want to see cars, there's a rental lot down the street. They'll let you sit in anything you like," he added, the sarcasm thick in his voice. A few staff members standing nearby chuckled under their breath. Their laughter was short, cruel, and carried across the showroom. Customers inside began to notice the tension. A young couple paused while looking at a red convertible. They turned to see what was happening. A middle-aged man in a business suit frowned slightly, watching as the salesman blocked Keanu's path. But no one spoke up. No one stepped in. Most of them assumed the staff must know better. If they treated him like this, maybe he really didn't belong there. Keanu, however, didn't let their behavior bother him. He stood quietly, listening. His eyes were calm, almost gentle. He didn't push back. He didn't argue. He didn't say, "I'm Keanu Reeves," or remind them that he could buy the entire building if he wanted. Instead, he just smiled faintly and stepped aside. The salesman seemed almost irritated by his politeness. He expected anger, protest, maybe even embarrassment. Instead, Keanu's silence made the salesman feel more unsettled. Still, he turned away with a shrug and walked back to his desk. Satisfied that he had done his job, Keanu continued moving, now heading toward the other side of the dealership. But the whispers followed him. "Why do these people come in if they can't afford anything?" One salesman muttered. Another replied, "They want to feel rich for a few minutes, that's all." The words stung, not because Keanu cared about their opinion, but because it revealed how little respect they had for strangers. Near the entrance, another staff member decided to make things clearer. He stepped forward with a forced smile. "The kind that wasn't friendly at all, sir," he said firmly. "We don't allow wandering in here if you're not planning to buy. Please don't waste our time." Those words were sharp, heavy, almost like pushing someone out without using hands. For many, such humiliation would be unbearable. Most people would storm out angrily, shouting. Others might break down in embarrassment. But Keanu did neither. He only gave another small nod, as though he had heard nothing unusual. His face was calm, his body relaxed. He didn't look offended. A silence followed for a moment. It was strange, because the man they were insulting seemed completely untouched. The salesman exchanged confused glances. Why wasn't he reacting? Why wasn't he defending himself? They couldn't understand. In the back of the showroom, the young mechanic who had been polishing a wheel froze. His rag slipped from his hand as he stared. He knew that face, he knew that walk. He had seen those eyes on the big screen in theaters. He whispered under his breath, "That's Keanu Reeves," but the others ignored him. They laughed, thinking it was impossible. Keanu Reeves? In jeans, here? No way, they said. The mechanic wanted to step forward, to say something, but he hesitated. The staff around him were older, louder. They didn't believe him. They thought they were in control of the situation. Meanwhile, Keanu quietly walked toward the glass doors. His steps were unhurried, his posture steady. The disrespect he faced was heavy, yet he carried it lightly. He was used to walking through life without showing off. He was used to people not realizing who he was until later. The salesmen thought they had won. They thought they had gotten rid of someone who didn't belong. But what they didn't realize was that they had just made the biggest mistake of their careers. They had pushed out not only a millionaire, but a man respected around the world for his kindness, humility, and quiet strength. And as Keanu reached for the door handle, the stage was set for a moment that would leave everyone inside speechless. The air inside the dealership felt heavy after the salesman's cold words. Keanu Reeves had not said a single harsh thing back. He had only nodded politely and moved toward the exit. It was a bright afternoon when customers inside had seen enough to realize something unusual was happening. A middle-aged man in a sharp suit stood near the counter. He had come with his wife to look at a new family SUV. At first he thought nothing of the man in jeans. But when he saw the sales staff laugh and whisper, he frowned. He whispered to his wife, "That's not how they should talk to customers." She only shrugged, saying, "Maybe they know him, maybe he's just wasting their time." Another couple, younger and dressed in fashionable clothes, had been admiring a red convertible when they saw the salesman block Keanu's path. They paused. The young woman tilted her head. "Why are they being so rude to him?" she asked. Her partner gave a small laugh. "Maybe he doesn't belong here. Look at his clothes." His words carried the same quick judgment as the staff, and he returned his attention to the car. A teenage boy sitting with his father in the waiting area also noticed. The boy's eyes followed Keanu carefully. Something about his face seemed familiar. He leaned closer to his father and whispered, "Doesn't that guy look like Keanu Reeves?" His father chuckled softly. "Keanu Reeves? Here, no chance." He waved the thought away. Even though no one was completely sure, people felt a strange tension. The way the staff treated him was uncomfortable. Some people shifted uneasily. Others pretended not to see. No one stepped forward to stop the mockery. They all let it happen in silence. Keanu, on the other hand, looked calm. He walked like a man who had nothing to prove. His simple clothes, his quiet steps, his soft smile. All of it made him look different from the usual customers who came in shouting about money and showing off expensive watches. The sales staff grew bolder, now speaking louder so even others could hear. "I don't understand why some people walk in when they can't afford a wheel, let alone the whole car," one of them said. A few customers laughed nervously, unsure if they should join or not. The mechanic in the back clenched his jaw. He knew who this man was. He wanted to shout it out, but fear held him back. Keanu stopped near the entrance for a moment. His eyes glanced back at the rows of cars. He didn't look sad or angry. Instead, he looked thoughtful, almost as if he had seen this kind of situation many times before. His life had taught him that wealth and fame didn't always bring respect. Sometimes the simplest person in the room was judged the harshest. The young couple near the convertible kept whispering. The woman said, "Something about him feels different. He's not reacting like most people would." The man shook his head. "Doesn't matter, he's leaving anyway." Meanwhile, the teenage boy couldn't stop staring. He whispered again, "Dad, I'm serious. That's Keanu Reeves. I saw his movie last month. Look at his walk." "That's him." His father looked once more, squinted his eyes, then dismissed it. "Even if it is him, what's he doing here dressed like that?" And so the crowd stayed divided, some curious, some doubtful, some judgmental. Everyone noticed, but no one truly understood. The staff felt confident they had done the right thing. They thought they had saved their time by not wasting it on a man they assumed could never buy a car. What they didn't know was that their every word, their every smirk was being remembered by those watching. Keanu gently placed his hand on the glass door, ready to step outside. The sunlight from outside fell across his face, and for the first time one or two customers gasped quietly. They saw his profile in the light, and in that moment they realized the truth. It was Keanu Reeves. A woman near the counter covered her mouth with her hand, whispering, "Oh my God, it really is him." Her husband blinked in shock, trying to piece together what he had just witnessed. Did they just insult Keanu Reeves? He asked in disbelief. The realization spread slowly. Like a ripple in water, people began to murmur, voices rising softly. The sales staff, however, still didn't believe it. They thought the whispers were just customers joking. One of them even laughed louder, saying, "Keanu Reeves? Please, he wouldn't step foot in here without cameras following him." But the truth was already out. At least a few customers had recognized him now. Their eyes widened, their hearts raced. They couldn't believe the staff had treated a man so famous, so respected, with such open disrespect. The mechanic, standing in the back with greasy hands, felt a fire burn in his chest. He wanted to run forward, to shake the salesman and say, "You fools. Do you know who you just pushed away?" But he stayed frozen, his heart pounding, waiting to see what would happen next. And so, while the staff remained blind in their arrogance, the crowd began to shift. Some people leaned forward. Others pulled out their phones. The air was filled with whispers, surprise, and a growing sense that something unforgettable was about to unfold. Keanu himself didn't seem to care about recognition. He still looked calm, peaceful, untouched by all the noise. He didn't reveal himself, he didn't speak his name. He just prepared to walk out the door with quiet dignity. And in that silence, everyone who had doubted him, laughed at him, or ignored him, was about to witness a moment they would never forget. The tension inside the dealership was growing. Keanu Reeves was just about to step outside, his hand on the door handle, when a voice broke through the whispers. It was not loud, but it was filled with shock and certainty. "That's Keanu Reeves," the young mechanic whispered from the back. He had been polishing the rim of a car, his hands covered in grease, his clothes simple and worn. Unlike the sales staff in suits, he looked like someone who worked hard with his hands every day. He had been quiet until now, afraid to speak up against the arrogant salesman. But the more he looked at the tall man in jeans, the more certain he became he had grown up watching Keanu's movies. He had seen The Matrix, Speed, and so many others. He had admired him not just as an actor, but as a kind soul. He knew those eyes, that walk, that calm face. The mechanic's whisper caught the attention of a few people nearby. One customer turned his head quickly, staring harder. "Wait, is it really him?" he asked softly. Another woman covered her mouth, her eyes wide. "It is him," she whispered back. Soon the murmurs started spreading like fire in dry grass. But when the mechanic tried to step forward, the nearest salesman scoffed. "Don't be ridiculous," he said sharply. "Keanu Reeves wouldn't walk in here looking like that." He gestured at Keanu's plain black t-shirt and worn jeans. His words carried a cruel laugh. The other salesmen nodded, agreeing. They didn't even bother to look closely. Their pride and arrogance blinded them. The mechanic, however, refused to back down. He raised his voice a little louder. "I'm telling you, that's Keanu Reeves." His words made a few customers lean forward, now whispering more urgently. The teenage boy who had noticed earlier grabbed his father's sleeve. "See, Dad, I told you it's him," he said. His father's expression slowly shifted from disbelief to surprise. Keanu himself heard the commotion, but he didn't react. He didn't turn around to confirm anything. He simply stayed calm, his hand still resting on the glass door. He didn't need to prove who he was. He had never lived his life chasing recognition. He had always believed that kindness and humility mattered more than fame. The mechanic's heart pounded. He couldn't stay quiet anymore. He hurried toward the sales staff, his voice trembling but clear. "You don't understand. You just insulted a man who could buy this whole building." "That's Keanu Reeves." The salesmen rolled their eyes. One of them even laughed out loud. "If he's Keanu Reeves, then I'm the president," he said mockingly. Another added, "Keanu Reeves doesn't walk alone. He doesn't come without an assistant, without cameras, without security." They were so sure of themselves. They had built walls around their arrogance, walls that kept them blind. But outside of those walls, the truth was becoming clearer to everyone else. More and more customers recognized him. A woman in the waiting area gasped, "I saw him in the news last week. That's definitely him." A man near the counter shook his head in disbelief. "Why would he come here dressed like that?" he asked, but his voice was uncertain now. The mechanic looked directly at Keanu, hoping he would say something. Keanu met his eyes and gave him the smallest smile. It was the kind of smile that said thank you without words. The mechanic felt a rush of pride. He was right. He knew he was right. The staff, however, still refused to admit it. "Sir," one of them called to Keanu, his tone dripping with false confidence. "If you're really who they say you are, prove it." The challenge hung heavy in the air. Customers held their breath, waiting. But Keanu didn't move. He didn't need to prove anything to anyone. He just stood there, his calmness louder than their insults. That calm silence shook the room more than words could. The arrogance of the salesman began to look smaller, weaker, compared to the quiet dignity standing in front of them. The mechanic felt his anger rise. "You fools," he said under his breath. "You don't even realize who you just threw out." By now, half the showroom was buzzing. People were whispering, pointing. Some pulled out their phones, ready to take pictures. The truth was slipping out of the salesman's control. The moment of realization was coming. And yet Keanu showed no pride, no anger. He didn't shout. He didn't reveal his name. He just waited, letting the people see for themselves. That was his way. He believed actions and character spoke louder than identity. The mechanic clenched his fists. Torn between frustration and awe, he wanted to protect Keanu, but he also admired how the actor carried himself without fear. Without pride, it was a lesson he would never forget. The sales staff thought they had won. They thought they had pushed out a poor stranger. But in truth, they had set the stage for their own humiliation. Because the moment more people realized the truth, Their arrogance would crumble into shame, and as Keanu finally pushed open the door to leave, the whispers had already turned into a wave of recognition. The dealership was no longer laughing. It was holding its breath, waiting for what would happen next. As Keanu Reeves stepped outside into the sunlight, the dealership behind him was still buzzing with whispers. The mechanic's words had planted doubt, and more customers were beginning to realize the truth. But inside, the sales staff continued to argue and laugh among themselves, pretending they had done nothing wrong. They were too proud to believe they had just insulted a world-famous actor. Keanu walked a few steps away from the door, blending into the busy street like an ordinary man. He didn't look back, he didn't call attention to himself. For him, the matter was over. He had come to admire cars, but instead he had been judged for his appearance. Still, his face showed no bitterness, just calm acceptance. But the mechanic couldn't let it end there. His hands were shaking as he rushed toward the manager's office. His voice cracked as he spoke. "Sir, do you realize who that was?" That was Keanu Reeves, the actor. "The man who starred in The Matrix. He was right here. And your staff pushed him out," the manager, a strict man in a crisp suit, raised an eyebrow. He didn't believe it at first. "Keanu Reeves here? Don't be foolish," he said. "Why would someone like him come alone, dressed like that?" But the mechanic's voice was desperate. "I know his face. I've seen his movies 100 times. I'm telling you, it was him." The manager dismissed him at first. But then another customer approached the counter nervously. "I think the boy is right," the woman said. "That was Keanu Reeves. I've seen him in interviews." "I'm sure of it." A murmur of agreement rippled through the waiting area. More customers nodded, whispering, "It's true." It was him. The manager's confidence cracked. He grabbed his phone with trembling hands, dialing the owner of the dealership within moments. The news traveled fast in the mechanic's words, the customer's whispers. The possibility that a Hollywood superstar had just been insulted in their showroom. The young mechanic came rushing out as well, wiping his greasy hands on a rag. He looked at Keanu with wide eyes. "Sir, I tried to tell them." "I knew it was you," he said quickly. His voice was filled with honesty and admiration. Keanu gave him a kind nod and said softly, "Thank you." That single word made the mechanic's heart swell with pride. He would never forget that moment for the rest of his life. The manager tried once again. "Mr. Reeves, please come inside. We'll fix everything, But Keanu raised his hand gently. Stopping him, his face still calm, he said, "I don't want anyone to fix anything. I just wanted to be treated with respect. That's all." When the owner heard the name, his voice turned sharp. "Keanu Reeves? You're telling me Keanu Reeves walked into my dealership and you threw him out?" The manager stammered. I didn't see him myself, but my staff said he looked like a nobody." The owner's voice thundered. "He is not a nobody. He's one of the most respected men alive. If it was him, you've just made the biggest mistake this dealership has ever seen." The manager's face turned pale. Sweat gathered on his forehead. He looked at the salesmen who had mocked Keanu. Their arrogant smiles gone now. They exchanged nervous glances. The weight of their actions was crashing down on them. Without wasting a second, the manager and 2 salesmen rushed outside, hoping to catch Keanu before he disappeared into the crowd. Their polished shoes clicked against the pavement as they hurried. Scanning left and right, their hearts pounded. What if he was gone already? What if they had lost the chance to fix this? And then they saw him, just a few steps down the sidewalk. Keanu stood calmly near a street corner, talking to a fan who had recognized him. The fan, a young man holding a notebook, looked starstruck as Keanu signed an autograph for him. Keanu's posture was relaxed, his voice gentle. He gave the fan his full attention, as if there were no rush, no arrogance, no importance in who was bigger or smaller. The manager froze for a moment. The sight confirmed everything. It really was him. There was no doubt left. The man they had mocked, the man they had judged, was Keanu Reeves. They hurried forward, their voices stumbling over apologies. "Mr. Reeves, please forgive us. We didn't recognize you," one of the salesmen said breathlessly. "If you come back inside, we'll give you the VIP treatment. Any car you want. We'll show you personally." The manager nodded eagerly. "Yes, sir, we'll make it right. Please let us correct this mistake." Keanu turned his head slowly, his calm eyes meeting theirs. He didn't look angry. He didn't raise his voice. He simply gave a small smile. The fan beside him watched with wide eyes, unable to believe what was happening. "I wasn't looking for special treatment," Keanu said softly. "I just wanted to look at the cars like anyone else." His words were simple, but they carried the weight of truth. The salesman felt their pride crumble. The customers who had followed outside gasped. They were hearing humility from a man who could have easily demanded respect. The manager tried again, desperate. "Please, Mr. Reeves, we made a mistake. Come inside. We'll take care of everything." But Keanu shook his head gently. "Thank you, but that won't be necessary." His voice was firm. Yet kind. In that moment, everyone around felt something shift. It wasn't just about a celebrity being mistreated. It was about a human being who had been judged unfairly, and instead of reacting with anger, he chose calmness and dignity. The salesmen stood there, embarrassed, their faces red. Their expensive suits and fake smiles couldn't protect them anymore. The crowd that had gathered looked at them with silent judgment, while the man they had mocked stood taller than ever, not because of fame but because of character. And as Keanu turned back to finish signing the fan's notebook, the truth was undeniable. They had insulted a man who could have bought every car in the showroom. But more importantly, they had insulted a man who valued respect over wealth. The dealership staff didn't know what to say. Their arrogance had been shattered, their mistake exposed. And the story of what had just happened was only beginning to spread. The street outside the dealership had become the real stage now. Keanu Reeves stood calmly near the sidewalk, the sunlight falling across his shoulders. He looked completely at peace, even though just minutes earlier he had been pushed aside and mocked inside the showroom. A young fan stood beside him holding out a notebook, his hands trembling with excitement. Keanu leaned down slightly, smiling warmly, and signed his name with care. He even wrote a short message, "Be kind always," before handing it back. The boy's face lit up as though he had just been given the greatest treasure of his life. The dealership staff hurried out of the doors like men chasing a train that was already leaving. The manager, sweating and out of breath, rushed forward. "Mr. Reeves, please wait," he called. His voice cracked with desperation. Two salesmen followed close behind, their arrogant smirks from earlier gone, now replaced with fear and shame. Keanu turned his head slowly, his calm eyes meeting theirs. He didn't look angry. He didn't look proud. He simply waited, his silence pressing harder on them than any harsh words could. The manager stumbled over his words. We are so sorry, sir. We didn't recognize you. We thought, well, we made a mistake. Please come back inside. We will give you the best service, VIP treatment, anything you want, just give us another chance." His voice shook as he spoke. The salesman who had told Keanu to go to a rental lot tried to speak next. His voice was lower now, without arrogance. "Yes, sir, forgive us, we were wrong, please allow us to make it right." He looked down at the ground, unable to meet Keanu's eyes, but Keanu only gave them a faint smile. His voice was gentle but clear. "I don't need special treatment," he said. "I just wanted to look at the cars like anyone else." The words were simple, but they struck like a heavy hammer. Customers who had followed outside gasped softly. They felt the weight of what he said. Respect was all he had asked for. Not fame, not favors, the manager nodded quickly. Yes, of course, and you will have it. Sir, please, if you come back in, we will personally assist you. No more mistakes." "I promise." His voice sounded desperate. He was afraid. Afraid of losing not just a sale but his reputation. Afraid that this story would spread far beyond the walls of the dealership. Keanu looked at him for a long moment. His calm gaze was almost uncomfortable to face. He didn't shout, he didn't scold. He didn't even mention the insults they had thrown at him. He simply said, "It's not about mistakes. It's about how you treat people when you think they're not important." Those words made the crowd fall into silence. Even the fan beside him looked up in awe. The sales staff shifted uneasily, their expensive shoes scraping against the pavement. They realized now that this was more than just an encounter with a celebrity. This was a lesson, one that had been delivered without anger, without pride, only with truth. The silence that followed was deep. The traffic on the street moved. Horns honked. People passed by. But for the one standing there, the world felt still. They were staring at a man who had every right to crush them with his fame, but instead chose humility. Some customers whispered among themselves, "Did you hear that? He doesn't want VIP service, he just wants respect," another said. And they couldn't even give him that. Until now. Their words carried the sting of truth. The salesmen lowered their heads, their pride broken. The manager's face turned red. He wanted to argue, to defend himself, but there was nothing left to say. The truth had been exposed. and Keanu's calm words had made their arrogance look even smaller. Keanu turned back to the fan and smiled again, continuing his conversation as though nothing else mattered. The fan was glowing with happiness, unaware that the entire dealership staff was crumbling in shame behind him. The staff could only stand there, frozen, realizing they had been given something worse than public anger. They had been given silence and kindness in the face of their cruelty. And that silence hurt far more, because Keanu's unexpected response was not to demand an apology, not to punish them, not to make a scene. His response was to remind everyone that respect should never depend on who someone is or what they look like. And those simple words, spoken with calmness, carried more power than any shout ever could. The people who stood outside the dealership could hardly believe what they were seeing. Keanu Reeves, a man loved by millions, had just been pushed aside like he was nobody, and instead of anger or pride, he answered with humility. His words hung in the air. "I don't need special treatment, I just wanted to look at the cars like anyone else." Those words were not loud, but they carried the weight of truth. Everyone who heard them felt a kind of silence inside their hearts. Some customers looked at each other with shame in their eyes. They had seen the disrespect happen and had chosen to stay quiet. They had even laughed along or ignored it, thinking it was normal. Now they realized how wrong they had been. The sales staff looked broken. Their arrogance had drained away like water slipping through fingers. The man who had mocked Keanu earlier could not even lift his head. He stared at the ground, his face burning with embarrassment. The one who had told Keanu to go to a rental lot clenched his jaw, wishing he could take back every word, but the damage was already done. The customers outside were whispering, "I can't believe they treated him like that," another said. "If they can treat Keanu Reeves this way, imagine how they treat ordinary people." That thought spread quickly, and it hit harder than any punishment. The truth was simple. They had shown their real character, and everyone had seen it. The young mechanic who had spoken up stood quietly now. He looked at Keanu with respect shining in his eyes. He knew this was not just about a celebrity. It was about kindness, about dignity, about the way one human being treats another. And Keanu had proved once again why people around the world admired him. For the customers, this became a lesson they would carry home. One woman whispered to her husband, "It makes me think about how I treat people who don't look rich or important." Her husband nodded, his face serious. "Respect doesn't cost anything, but it means everything," he said quietly, repeating the thought that was already forming in everyone's mind. The dealership staff wanted to hide. They wanted the ground to swallow them whole. Some tried to mumble apologies again, but the words felt empty now. Nothing could erase the fact that they had judged a man by his clothes, by his quiet walk, by the absence of a gold watch on his wrist. They had chosen arrogance instead of respect, and it had cost them more than they imagined. Keanu didn't stay to lecture them. He didn't scold or humiliate them. He didn't tell the world what had happened. He simply stood there with the fan, smiling, talking, being himself. And in that simple act, he taught a greater lesson than any speech could. The people watching felt a strange mix of emotions. They were amazed at his humility, but also ashamed for how quickly they themselves had judged him. They realized how easy it was to assume, to laugh, to stay silent. And now they saw how powerful it was when one person chose kindness over pride. Even the teenage boy who had recognized him earlier turned to his father and said, "You see, Dad, I told you it was him." His father nodded. But his voice was quiet now. "Yes, son. And I'll never forget how he handled this. Not with anger, but with respect for the staff." It was a bitter pill. Their expensive suits and practiced smiles could no longer cover their mistake. They had shown the world who they really were when they thought no one important was watching. And now, they would be remembered not for selling luxury cars, but for the way they had failed to show basic decency. The lesson was clear for everyone standing there. Respect is not something you give only to the rich or the famous. Respect is something every human being deserves, and when you deny it, you reveal more about yourself than about the person you insult. Keanu's calmness turned into a mirror, reflecting the arrogance of the staff and the silence of the crowd. And in that reflection, everyone saw their own faces. Some felt proud they had realized the truth, others felt guilty they had stayed quiet. The staff felt humiliated that they had mocked a man who had more dignity in his silence than they had in their words. The mechanic finally found the courage to speak again. "Sir," he said softly to Keanu, "thank you for showing them what real respect looks like." Keanu gave him a small nod, a smile that was warm and kind. That moment stayed with the mechanic forever. It became the story he would tell his children and grandchildren, not because he met a celebrity, but because he met a man who lived with true humility. The dealership, once filled with polished cars and cold arrogance, now stood as a reminder. The people who had mocked were silent, the customers who had watched were thoughtful, and Keanu Reeves walked away carrying nothing but the same quiet dignity he had brought in, leaving behind a lesson no one could forget. The dealership had grown quiet. The laughter that once filled the air was gone, replaced by heavy silence. The arrogant smiles of the sales staff had vanished. Customers stood in small groups whispering, shaking their heads, trying to process what they had just witnessed. Keanu Reeves, one of the most famous actors in the world, had walked into their showroom, and instead of being welcomed, he had been pushed out and humiliated, and yet, the part that stunned them most was not the insult itself. It was his response. Keanu had not raised his voice. He had not revealed his fame in anger. He had not demanded respect through power or money. Instead, he had shown calmness, humility, and dignity that shamed everyone far more than shouting ever could. The manager stood awkwardly nearby. His face pale, his lips tight. He wanted to apologize again, but every word felt too small now. Nothing he could say would erase what had happened. The salesmen who had mocked Keanu looked even worse. Their heads hung low. Their expensive suits no longer made them look powerful. They looked small, weak, and ashamed. Keanu, however, stood calmly, still smiling faintly, still speaking kindly to the young fan beside him. His presence alone filled the space with quiet strength. The fan clutched his signed notebook tightly, his eyes wide with admiration. He would never forget this day, not just because he met his hero, but because he saw his hero's true character with his own eyes. Finally, as Keanu prepared to leave, the crowd waited for his last words. It felt as if the entire street had gone silent, every person leaning in, hoping to hear what he might say. He didn't speak with anger. He didn't point fingers. Instead, his voice was calm, steady, and gentle. "Respect doesn't cost anything," he said, "but it means everything." The words cut deeper than any insult could. They were simple, but they carried the weight of truth. They rolled through the crowd, settling in every heart. Some people lowered their heads, ashamed. Others nodded slowly, realizing the lesson they had just been given. The staff stood frozen, their faces red, unable to answer. For the first time, they were speechless. The customers who had stayed quiet earlier now looked guilty. They had witnessed the disrespect and chosen silence. Now they realized that silence had made them part of the problem. A woman whispered to her husband, "I should have said something." He nodded, his face heavy. "We all should have," the mechanic, standing at the edge of the group, felt his chest tighten with emotion. He had spoken up, but too late still when Keanu's eyes met his. The mechanic saw kindness. He felt forgiven. He felt that Keanu's words were not just aimed at the staff, but at everyone who had stood by and watched. Keanu didn't say more. He didn't need to. His single sentence was enough to leave the entire dealership in silence. He turned and walked down the street, his steps calm, blending back into the crowd like any ordinary man. The fan followed him for a few steps before stopping, staring at him in awe, clutching his notebook to his chest like a treasure. Behind him, the dealership stood still. The cars inside gleamed under the lights, but no one cared about their shine anymore. What everyone remembered was not the luxury, not the money, but the lesson. The staff knew this moment would follow them for years. Customers would tell the story. The mechanic would tell it to his friends and family. And the salesman who had mocked him would never forget the look in people's eyes when they realized who they had mistreated. One by one, the customers left, their whispers carried out into the world, spreading the story like fire. They spoke about Keanu's humility, his patience, his words. "Respect doesn't cost anything, but it means everything." The line repeated itself in every mouth, growing stronger each time. The staff finally retreated back inside. But they could not escape the shame. Their suits felt heavier. Their polished shoes dragged on the floor. The manager sat at his desk holding his head in his hands. He knew this story would reach the owner, the newspapers, maybe even the internet. Their mistake had been too great to hide. The mechanic, however, felt something else. He felt pride that he had at least spoken up. Even if late, and more than pride, he felt inspired. He had seen the kind of man Keanu Reeves was, Not just an actor, not just a celebrity, but a human being who valued respect above all. It gave him hope. It gave him courage to live by the same lesson. As for the crowd, they walked away shaken but wiser. They had all learned something that day. They had seen that true greatness was not measured in money, clothes, or fame. It was measured in humility, in kindness, in respect. And so Keanu Reeves disappeared into the city like a quiet shadow, leaving behind a story that would echo in hearts for a long time. A story that reminded everyone that respect is free but priceless. A story that left a luxury dealership, its staff, and its customers utterly speechless.